Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ali Mudaris, Assistant Chancellor for Community Partnerships, and also for this year, Interim Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. Before we start the program, I would like to present our land acknowledgement, and then following that, I will explain a little bit about Faculty Fellows Program and today's activities. So we recognize that all of us at UW Tacoma learn, live, and work on or near the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people. In particular, our campus is situated on the traditional homeland of the Puyallup tribe. Since we're gathered virtually, I also want to acknowledge the lands of Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Suquamish, Snohomish, Sammamish, and Duwamish, and all traditional land we may all be on today. As people on these occupied territories, we have a responsibility to acknowledge the land, the ancestors who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and all our indigenous connections today. We also want to acknowledge the histories of dispossession and forced removal. In light of this history, let us learn, reflect, and practice in ways that honors their memory and keep us committed to the cause of social justice for indigenous population. Thank you. Well, once again, thank you for joining us. Faculty Fellows Program is one of the favorite programs of the Office of Community Partnerships. We have so far funded 3 cohorts, and we are enjoying all the work and the continuation of that work. It is important for me to also indicate that when we talk about this fellowship program, it's not necessarily just for the faculty. It's a group of faculty who work with their community partners, and they have different kind of activities in mind and different ways that they expand the work. Following the mission of our office, they build on existing activities, they expand, or they sustain a program that they've had. And this is typically two or more faculty plus students maybe, but also community partners that they're building relationship or they have built relationship with already. That said, it is important to also say that many of our faculty fellows continue to use the initial funding to build on what they have started with us and go further. And the funding itself to the faculty fellows is not to the faculty themselves alone. It's really to support the community partners who we value their time that they are providing with us, to us as a community, and we work together. Also, one additional dimension of this is not just for research activities, but also teaching activities and project-based activities. So there isn't a specific narrow definition of the work that gets done. With that in mind, we have the best examples of last year with us, and we are looking forward to the presentations on that and hearing what they have accomplished and what the future might hold for the programs that they have been interacting with and working with. And as always, the staff of OCP will be, they have been supporting these activities and they will continue to do so, and they're a part of today's program. With that, I am going to recede to the background, mute myself, and allow them to run their program. They're emceeing the program. So with that, again, thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to all the presentations.
Thank you, Ali. Welcome, everyone. My name is Carly Johnson, and I'm the program coordinator with OCP. And I'm just going to go over the format of the event today and just some housekeeping things really quick. So we have all 4 of the 2021 faculty fellows with us today, and they are going to present for up to 10 minutes each. Some of them will have their community partners helping present, and others it will just be them. And the order that we're going to go is, so we have Dr. Robin Minthorn, and then Dr. Anandita Bhattacharya, and Dr. Jim Gall, and then Dr. Chris Beasley. And after each of them present, we will open it up to the audience for a Q&A portion. And so we'll give you a chance to be able to ask them questions and interact with them. And if you're unable to stay till the end, we think if everyone goes for approximately 10 minutes, we think that'll be around 1:20 p.m. If you're unable to stay to that portion, feel free to send your questions through the chat, and Julia and I will get those and we can ask those questions for you. And the presenters were given some prompts to help them as they prepared for the presentation. They don't have to stick to those, but I will just read the prompts to you so you can get a feel for what they might be talking about. Give a summary description of the Faculty Fellows project, and how did the funding help develop and grow your engagement partnership work? What are some of your proudest accomplishments of the project, and what are some challenges, and what advice do you have for other faculty who are interested in community engaged work? And just a reminder, the event is being recorded and it is going to be available on the OCP website and our YouTube channel. And with that, I will pass it on to Julia Smith.
Thank you, Carly. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to hear these wonderful presentations. And just one more thing before we get to that, if we could just do a quick round of introductions. We've got a lot of people here who may or may not know one another. So I'll list the names. So I'll just sort of call on you, if you will, and just introduce yourself, your name, where you work. Some of our guests here are within the university and others are outside. So we'll just do brief introductions, and then I will introduce our first speaker. And I will start with, let's see here, I'm just going to go in order on my screen. I'm going to wait to introduce the presenters until the end. So we'll the other participants first. So I will start with Cheryl Greengrove.
Hi all, I'm Cheryl Greengrove. I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at UW Tacoma.
Linda.
I'm an emeritus faculty member from the School of Urban Studies at UW Tacoma.
And you have a friend with you.
Always. That's Nocturne.
Alan.
I'm Alan Foote. I'm the data analyst intern for the Office of Community Partnerships.
Ainsley.
I'm Ainsley. I'm the technical project manager for the Office of Community Partnerships.
Jose.
Good afternoon. Jose Rodriguez, Education Assessment Specialist at the University of Washington, Bothell.
Good to see you. Thank you. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Lawless. I'm the Chief of Staff in the Chancellor's Office, and I'll apologize up front. I have to leave at 1 o'clock for a previous meeting, so I'll watch the rest on YouTube.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Erin.
Hi, everyone. Erin Casey in the School of Social Work and Criminal Justice. And I also, unfortunately, have to leave at 1.
Okay, no problem. Laura.
Good afternoon, everyone. I too have to leave at 1:30. I'm happy to be here, and I am a professor in the School of Education. And I also work with the Office of Community Partnerships with Tacoma Public Schools.
Wonderful. Priyanjali.
Hello, I am Priyanjali Chakraborty. I'm a first-year student in the PhD program of social work at University of Texas, Arlington. I have been working with Dr. Bhattacharya on this project, so I'm very excited to see the presentation.
Good to see you. Thank you. Yuta?
Hi, I'm Yuta Heller, Associate Teaching Professor in SIAS in Biomedical Sciences.
Anthony?
Hi, I'm Anthony Chen. I'm Director of Health of the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. I have clinical appointments in school public health and nursing, and also on the advisory committee for the OCP.
Welcome, Anthony. Ashley? Are you there, Ashley? Okay, we'll move on. Emily?
Good afternoon, everyone. Emily Hall with the Executive Council for Greater Tacoma, and I also am currently serving as the chair for the School of Urban Studies.
Tracy?
Hello, I'm Tracy Kelly, Executive Director for Catherine Place, which is a women's center here in Tacoma.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of other guests joined us since we began introductions. So Jayran, would you just please introduce yourself and where you work?
Hi, I'm Jayran Kim, and I'm with the School of Social Work and Criminal Justice.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dr. Lang also just joined us. You would give us a brief introduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila Everslang, the Chancellor here at UW-T.
Okay, and then I think we have everybody. We do also, I want to thank our media services. Zach Curtis is here working on the technical component of this. So thank you very much, Zach, for being here. Appreciate it. And I think that is all of the guests at this point. So I'm going to move to introducing our first presenter, Dr. Robin Minthorn, who works in the School of Education. Robin.
Okay, I am going to share my screen and then I'll start. Can you all see that okay? Okay.
Yes.
Honde onde baponte and Robin Zeptahola Minthorn Ka. My name is Robin Minthorn, and I am situated and work, live, and responsible to the Puyallup tribe, but also Coast Salish tribes in the state of Washington, and specifically in the South Puget Sound area. I want to acknowledge what my collective project with the faculty fellows was strengthening tribally based partnerships through Indigenous-based approaches to community building. First, I want to share artwork that I'll mention maybe a little bit later on, but I wanted to acknowledge the artwork that we have commissioned through a Muckleshoot tribal member, Samuel Oberbach, who was able to put this piece of art together for us, and that we have as one of our logos that we acknowledge. It also represents the partnership between the University of Washington Tacoma and the Muckleshoot tribe. And so I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. This was previously funded through the UW Seed Grant, and I want to also acknowledge that. But I'm also grateful for Samuel Oberbach, who worked with us closely to make some modifications to make sure we're fulfilling the requirements of the UW system in regards to logos and all of that. And so I really appreciate his beautiful representation that he created for us. And so I also want to acknowledge Dr. Michelle Montgomery, who is also listed as a co-PI for this faculty fellow, and then also Dr. Denise Bill, who was a letter of support for us as well from the Muckleshoot tribe. She is the executive director of their adult and higher education and oversees the Muckleshoot Tribal College building as well. So I also want to acknowledge her as a part of this. So one of the things, I also forgot to start my timer. So please let me know when I'm getting close. I'll go ahead and set it and keep it to 8 minutes from now. I also wanted to share a creation story. One of the things that I've been very grateful to learn more about the Muckleshoot tribe. This partnership actually started before I even was here. I want to acknowledge, and I really appreciate the teaching that Dr. Bill gave to me, is that, you know, the reason that our partnership exists today is because other partnerships were built within the University of Washington, and because other people have laid that foundation, even if they weren't directly connected to what we currently have. I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging those connections. So this creation story is a part of that connection. And so I want to make sure that we're acknowledging Dr. Willard Bill, who is Dr. Denise Bill's father, who was one of the first Muckleshoot tribal members to earn a doctorate at UW. And then also Virginia Cross, who is a longtime Muckleshoot Tribal Council member. She's also serving on our Muckleshoot Partnership Education Committee currently. And so I want to also acknowledge her, who also created space in regards to Indigenous education and received her master's degree at UW Seattle in 1978. And that there was also a partnership between UW Bothell and UW Seattle and UW Tacoma that was being developed in 2012. And then in 2018, there was a solidified partnership with the UW Bothell and providing a certificate through business operation and management. So I just want to acknowledge that a lot of that is integrated and connected to what we currently have with the Muckleshoot tribe. And what we have now today is when I first started at UW Tacoma in 2019, within about a month after I started, somebody, Amy Maharaj, had seen that I was hired at the university. Thanks to the people that do the stories at UW Tacoma, they were able to see that my connection to the Indigenous education and all of that was there, and wanted to know more about what we do at UW Tacoma School of Education. And so we were able to start meetings. And so for us to be able to have the memorandum of agreement that we currently have, it took 18 meetings of working with the Muckleshoot tribe. And all of those meetings, except for one, were held on the Muckleshoot tribal lands. I want to also acknowledge that. When we're talking about building partnerships, it's not always about making them come to us as we go to them. And we have to make sure that we're learning and growing with them as well. I also want to acknowledge, I think she's still on this call. I want to acknowledge Ashley Walker, who is the EDD advisor and who's been a part of many of those meetings and has been very committed to the Muckleshoot Tribal Partnership and has also been a part of our collective that we have in growing together. And so after we were able to sign a memorandum of agreement in February of 2020, we're able to start recruiting for our first Muckleshoot doctoral cohort, which started in the summer of 2020. We accepted 15 people that were interested in that cohort and then applied and were accepted. And then we ended up starting with 14 Native American women. 2 are non-Indigenous, but have worked in tribal communities for a number of years. And so they have those tribal connections and experience of working with tribes. And that was very important in regard to this indigenized way of approaching graduate and doctoral education. And so we are currently now in our second year of the Muckleshoot doctoral cohort. And so a part of that was trying to figure out how do we deepen our connections to what we currently have within the Muckleshoot doctoral cohort. And so I will share more about that now. Maybe. Okay, there we go. So an overview of our hard work is that we wanted to make sure how can we indigenize the process that the Muckleshoot doctoral students were going through. And so part of that is that we were also going through significant changes with our EDD program. And so instead of conceptualizing our practicum, which is an opportunity for them to gain leadership development, our community engagement, that we reconceptualize that to a community grounded praxis. Through our significant changes, and that takes place in their second year. So they're actually currently going through their community grounded praxis. And so part of that is we also wanted to build in something that would acknowledge and honor how they're building in Indigenous knowledge connected to this. And so we were able to have approval and work with the Professional Development Office at UW Tacoma to be able to offer a certificate, Indigenous knowledge and community centered approaches. And so we have that now, and they will actually receive that at the end of this year. They have done additional 40 hours of work in engaging with collecting stories within their families, with their tribal communities, learning how to acknowledge digitizing stories and oral knowledge sharing as a part of that process. And that's something that was really important to us. And they are also incorporating, most of them are incorporating that as a part of their community grounded praxis. And a lot of them are working with their own tribal communities or the tribal communities that they currently are working in if they are non-Indigenous. And so that was something that was really also important for us, is for them to continue to maintain those ties and connections to that. And so we wanted to be intentional about that as well. And so the second area that we also wanted to focus on was how to build an Indigenous writing voice for Indigenous doctoral students. And so we were able to work with Dr. Michelle Jacobs, who has Anahui Mentoring Project. And so she does writing retreats and writing sessions with Indigenous scholars, Indigenous graduate students. And so we were able to have her do 12 writing sessions over the course of each one a month over the course of this last calendar year. And so that gave the students an opportunity to really re-engage and reconceptualize how we think of writing. in a way that's Indigenous-centered, connected to our ancestors, and really re-prescribing and re-ordering how we think of our own writing and pedagogy. And so that was really important and powerful when I was able to sit in on those sessions and see her work with the students who were able to attend. And so that was the other second part of our project that we focused on for this faculty fellowship. And so the goal for this project was to deepen our connections with the Muckleshoot tribe, as well as the surrounding tribal communities, and engaging the Muckleshoot doctoral cohort within their community grounded praxis, as well as helping them to develop an Indigenous-centered approach to knowledge construction and sharing. And so the highlights of this work that I wanted to acknowledge is that we continue to build community together through the Muckleshoot cohort and the collective way we're approaching the Tribal University Partnership. So we really try to take a collective approach to this and not make it led by one person, but really guided by everybody. We also do hold quarterly or biannual Muckleshoot Partnership Education Committee meetings where we check in with tribal leaders and employees from the Muckleshoot tribe on what we can do to improve our partnership, including the UW Native community voice as well. So we have individuals who are from the UW Bothell, Seattle, and Tacoma campus who are Native faculty or Native staff. And then we also have Ashley Walker, who's also a part of that as well. And so we really try to make sure that we're accountable to sharing what we're doing, but also getting feedback and making modifications and improving and growing in what we're doing. And then we also continue to meet monthly, or at least once a quarter at the very least, with the collective that we have, which is again, myself, Dr. Denise Bill, Dr. Michelle Montgomery, Ashley Walker, and Amy Maharaj, who was the original person to contact about the building a connection with the UW Tacoma School of Education. And so we are continuing to think of new ways to approach and honor Indigenous knowledges and ways of being. And so for us to be able to be approved for the certificate is a way of acknowledging Indigenous knowledges in a way that the students can leave with something and take that with them to show that they had an indigenized approach to their doctoral education. So that was something that was really important for us to be able to build in and connect. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges and the advice. So one of the challenges, obviously, is that we are still navigating a pandemic. And I want to acknowledge that and that it has impacted our tribal communities, their families, and our Muckleshoot doctoral students in so many ways. Some of our students have had COVID over this quarter, last quarter. Their families had COVID, their communities were shut down to protect their communities. And so I just want to acknowledge that. It's not only a challenge, but it's also a way that we need to be protecting how we're interacting and engaging with community and making sure we're listening and acknowledging what their preference is and how we engage with them. So we've been virtual this whole time because we wanted to acknowledge and provide a safe space for the students, but also being able to learn collectively in a virtual space. And so my advice to you would be to be open to learning and growing. We are not experts in everything that we do, and we're always learning, always growing, to listen and to respond to our community partners and building relationships, to communicate. I think that's one of the things that I've learned most is communicate when you're making progress, even behind the scenes, because sometimes people don't know exactly what you're doing. And so I really think that's important. Create reciprocal relationships because it needs to go back and forth, and we need to acknowledge the strengths of both and making sure that we're acknowledging that, and to always center the community's voices and needs first, because that's why we're doing this partnership, is because it's for the community and with the community. So I just want to acknowledge that. So that's all I have, and thank you. Aho and katsiayo.
Dr. Minthorn, thank you. That was so amazing. And wow, 10 minutes is just simply not enough. Look forward to talking to you more later. I would like to introduce our second presenter, and that is Anadita Bhattacharya with the School of Social Work and Criminal Justice.
Thank you, Julia. I'll go ahead and share screen. Good afternoon, everyone. I cannot believe it's been a year, and here we are presenting on the project.
So today I will be talking a little bit about a brief overview on what we accomplished so far and our process for the project titled Gender Sensitive and Culturally Responsive Care. And through this project, our aim and our hope was to bring practitioners from diverse contexts and different agencies together across in both India and the US. So before I begin, I really want to acknowledge my community partners. This project would not have been completed without their support. Also, just a quick reminder that this project began in 2020 when COVID was at its peak and agencies were really, really busy and overwhelmed, adapting, shifting most of their programs online. And despite those challenges, they were on board with this project. So thank you, Catherine Place. I know Tracy is here today, so thank you, Tracy. YWCA in Tacoma. I also had the pleasure to work with a South Asian agency in California called Narika, and they work with primarily Indian immigrant women in the US experiencing domestic violence. And then Ishwar Shankolpo, which is an agency back home in Calcutta, India, who work with primarily women who are homeless, who have experienced severe degrees of sexual and domestic violence and are also diagnosed with mental health challenges. One of the things we did in our project was we formed a community advisory board led by Tracy, Karen, Hannah, Bindu, and Debani from India. And this advisory board was really, really critical because they helped us not only identify research priorities, but they also pushed us in asking questions that were of relevance to the community. So identifying research priorities, kind of giving us a picture on the on-the-ground realities. There is a huge gap between social work research and social work practice. And one of the things through this project that we were hoping to do was to close that gap by really listening to practitioners and challenges they experience on the ground level. Our advisory board members, we met every month and they helped us immensely with the research process, giving us feedback on our interview guides, making sure our questions captured realities of communities, and they also helped us with recruitment. And then, of course, Office of Community Partnerships. Thank you for the funding support, particularly Julia. Thank you for your patience and for processing all those innumerable gift cards with so much grace. My project team, so David, Dr. Camacho, and Dr. Lukens are not here, but thank you to them and to Johanna, who is my graduate student at UW-Tacoma, who's helped me tremendously, and Priyanjali was an immense, grateful addition to this project, also because she's bilingual and she helped me conduct most of my focus group discussions in India, waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock to make sure that we were able to do that. So I think one of the prompts was the importance and the significance of funding support. And of course, funding support really helped us cover our data collection costs. It also provided an opportunity for students to take part in the project. So Johanna was able to take part. And at the same time, I was also able to compensate her for her time and expertise. It also allowed me to, of course, establish my partnerships with my community partners, to really make sure that I was able to acknowledge my survivors' time and expertise when they took part in the interviews through the gift card incentives. And more importantly, I think because I was able to also work with the agency in India, funding support that I receive in the US adds up to a lot of support in the Indian context. And that was very much appreciated by the Indian agency. And I was really, I kind of acknowledged the smoothness with which gift cards were really it was transferred in a Indian currency account, but it was super quick. So that was good. So a little bit about the project background. Why was this project important? All of us know that especially since COVID, the incidence of interpersonal violence and domestic violence has skyrocketed. And one of the significance of that is that we need more culturally and gender sensitive mental health care. We need more services that can respond to women from culturally diverse communities. But if you look at research, there is a lot of emphasis on challenges and barriers, but there is not a lot of conversation around what are community-based agencies doing that we can learn from. So one of the things in this project that I really wanted to highlight and amplify were the best practices that are happening, the innovations that are happening on the ground level, despite the several barriers. So over the course of the last year, we were able to work with 28 practitioners and 13 survivors, and we met with them through advisory board meeting, focus group discussion, and in-depth interview. And one of the big strengths of our project was really able to integrate perspectives of women from different communities. And that's why my team is a huge asset for me, because among the four of us, we spoke English, Spanish, Hindi, and Bengali. So we were really able to integrate experiences in diverse languages. So like I said, it was really important for us to integrate providers' perspectives, because the WHO also recognizes that one of the ways in which we can deliver gender-sensitive and culturally responsive care is understanding how our providers translating some of their own awareness in practice. So when we invited providers into the focus group, we really asked them to reflect and share on who they are, what their identities are, and how that translates into practice. And at the same time, they also shared areas of need, right? There are a lot of structural challenges that come in the way sometimes of providing this kind of responsive care. So they were able to identify areas of need that we hope we can address in the years to come. And for me, of course, it was really important to integrate survivors' perspectives, because there is very, very limited research that integrates voices of women who are experiencing IPV and domestic violence. So given that all these women were from different culturally diverse communities, they had different understandings of domestic violence and IPV. So we invited them to share their definitions and their perceptions, and more importantly, what has been their experience receiving services so far, and what are their recommendations on how they can be better supported by the systems. So the accomplishments so far, I think we've been really able to center women's stories. We've given them, sorry, not that we've given them, but we invited them to share their experiences, but we did that through a strengths and resiliency framework. I think all through our interviews, our survivors really shared ways in which they negotiate systems, they navigate complex systems, and then also what helps and does not help. And through our practitioners' perspectives, one of the things that we are currently drafting is a framework for gender-sensitive and culturally responsive care. And this framework is really built from practice wisdom, right? And we hope that then we can share this framework with other agencies and in different contexts. There is also a lot of lessons that we learned by doing this kind of research on a very, very sensitive and personal topic. So we are also spending a lot of time reflecting on how do we create methodologies that are more trauma-informed, and how do we conduct these research projects, making sure that women's safety and well-being is prioritized. One of my survivors wrote this on an email a few days after she had taken part, and she said, "Thank you again for taking your time to join our group to hear a little bit about the struggles we face within the system. I hope together we can make a difference. I have gone full circle from being a caseworker to a client. I'm utterly baffled by the lack of care and holes in our system. I truly understand where my clients are coming from when they tell me their struggles navigating the system to be successful. I see why people give up. It feels like the system wants us to fail. I have so much passion for this. I will further my education and study the law as well. I would also like to say, please feel free to contact me for other events in which you could use a DV survivor, because I have a story to tell and I want to make a change in Tacoma and all around the world. And this was a kind of a similar message that we received from several of the women that we interviewed. So one of the things that my team and I are currently talking about is how do we work on disseminating what we've learned to wider communities. There is still very limited awareness around what domestic violence and IPV looks like in different contexts. So one of my plan is to again meet with my community partners and really draft an action plan that we can share with the wider community. So looking at, of course, disseminating project findings within an academic setting, but also how do we get the word out in non-academic spaces? And by doing so, how are we making sure that we are centering women's stories? We were also invited to take part in an interview a couple of months back that was done by the University of Southern California to reflect light on how domestic violence manifests among Indian immigrant women in the US. And we are currently in the process of submitting a book chapter where we are looking at the experiences receiving domestic violence support for Indian immigrant women in the US. And I'm happy to talk about this in the Q&A round, but there is a lot of, the way domestic violence manifests among Indian immigrant women looks very different, and I feel there is not enough awareness around it. I don't know if I'm out of time because I think I am.
Yes, we're at here a little bit over.
So I do have some challenge. Do I have a minute, Julia, just to go over the challenges?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really important to look at the challenges because COVID really has changed many things in terms of doing community-based research. For us, it of course presented challenges to engagement because technology was not always accessible and available to women. So we often had focus groups where women would join us on Zoom, but there was a lot of problem with keeping them on Zoom because of technology. And also more importantly, the nature of the work requires an interpersonal presence. I have done this kind of work by being in person. So doing sensitive interviews on Zoom was really challenging. And of course, we are constantly thinking about more trauma-informed ways of doing this work, right? Asking survivors to take part in research projects as they are experiencing crisis as we speak, right? So how do we make sure that we are constantly prioritizing what their needs are? And of course, this was a project that brought India and US together, but there was a lot of challenges in bringing practitioners on the same page because of time difference, because of language barriers. So we are also really looking at how do we as researchers bridge that gap when you have practitioners from two countries on two sides of the world. But I'm more than happy to talk about any of these challenges in detail. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Anandita. It was wonderful, really wonderful. Our next presenter is Jim Gowell with the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. Jim.
Thank you, and I'm hoping you're seeing my screen.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Gell, and I talk about our community engaged project that we did this past year. And it's all about lakes. So one of the things we got interested in was who uses lakes, why do they use them, what do they use them for, and what are the potential barriers to access that we have for different populations around these lakes. Oops, there we go. And our team was across all three campuses of the UW. So we had Avery Shinneman, who's associate teaching professor up at UW Bothell, and Julian Olden, who's a professor in the school's aquatic and fisheries sciences at UW Seattle. We had students from each of the three campuses, 2 undergrads and a grad student, And then we had our community partners who were with King County, with Snohomish County, and with a regional Lake Protection Association, Rob Zizette. So we have partners that span all across, well, the faculty members are all involved in lake science in some way. And then the community partners are all involved in lake management in some way. And so pulling these groups together to figure out what data gaps we had in how people use lakes and who's not being served is what we were looking to do. And so this grew out of some research I do, mostly polluted systems. And so this grew out of some research where we had found that there was a cancer risk from exposure of subsistence fishermen in lakes around the region, but we had no idea who these populations were. We had seen people just when we're out doing our research. We observed people fishing and taking those fish home in these contaminated lakes. But they tend to not be groups that live on the lake. They're not residents there. They tend to be people of color for sure, and often low income populations that we see. And so how do you gauge where these populations come from? How do you communicate with them for things like this? And that grew into some bigger questions in this fellowship, just about who uses these lakes, what's the breakdown of different people, how do they use them, or how do they get, we call them cultural ecosystem services, what do they get out of using those lakes, what do the lakes provide, and then how do we best communicate with those populations in their own ideas. So that's what we went after. And so why should we spend all this effort on lakes? So we now have a term for them. People call them blue spaces versus green spaces now. So you have blue spaces that are surrounded by parks often, which are your green spaces. And the combination of those things, we know from the literature, provides mental health benefits. It actually improves educational outcomes. If a student can just view a blue or a green space while they're working on schoolwork, it improves their test scores. Which is kind of amazing. It is an important part of food for a lot of populations, especially those in poverty and BIPOC communities. We know it's a cultural practice that's a big part of people's identity, that especially people that either grew up or moved here. And it also results in improved health outcomes, especially under these heat events that we had this past summer while we were doing our research. And so what we did is we surveyed 18 different lakes intensively throughout King and Snohomish County across the gradient of environmental health disparities index, which is related to income and racial and ethnic makeup and other things. And so that's some of that spread is shown on the map. We looked at these both morning and afternoon on weekdays and weekends over 4 months during the summer when usage is the highest. And we did both observational data where we're sitting out there and recording how many people are doing what in the park, as well as soliciting survey responses from those people using the park or the lake at that particular time, as well as some online survey dissemination that we did after the fact. So that was how we collected all of our data. So big accomplishments. First of all, this was 672 hours of data collection over 4 months. So this was a lot, plus driving time, which ended up often being just almost as much as the actual data collection time when you're trying to drive to Snohomish County from Tacoma or coming back at 5 o'clock. So that was a big deal to actually be able to accomplish that. We got survey data online from 50 different lakes in the region, not just the 18 intensively studied lakes that we had. We got 700 surveys submitted by people, mostly in person, some online, which was a huge return for what we have. And the map that you can see here are the 18 intensively studied lakes and how many surveys relatively we got from each of those lakes throughout King and Snohomish counties. So we were able to collect our data, which was a great, we were happy to have that all pulled together, especially since we were collecting data during part of COVID. And so we had a COVID protocol that had been approved by human subjects that we had to follow. So it was a lot of extra sort of concern there. And some of our initial results, we're still analyzing the data and figuring out where to go with it. But a couple things just of interest: 75% of the people that go to these lakes go there to cool off during extreme heat events, which is a huge issue related to climate change that we're seeing now. 85% of those people actually swim or go into the water at least, which is good for cooling down, but potentially has some exposure issues when it comes to human health. 34% of those people fish, so a third of those. 42% reported greater lakeside park usage during the pandemic. So that was a huge draw to people when they're trying to get outside safely. And it turns out that distance to transit actually and park size affects how many people can use a lake or do use a lake. And then related to some of those health disparities and the racial breakdown of data that we have, visitation on August afternoons and weekends increased as the health disparity score actually went up, which means those with higher health disparities actually showed greater usage of these spaces. People who were boating were more often white than any of the other identities that we were working with. Except for Hispanic, non-white racial identities were more likely to not swim, which might be related to education around swimming safety and access to that. Non-white racial identities, except for Asian, were more concerned with water safety as connected to the last one. And there was a personal safety barrier greater for Asians than for anybody else that we surveyed. And then white respondents actually were more concerned about homeless individuals being in the park than anywhere else. So we saw this big disparity as far as potential access and education that goes on there. How we address those things is really a big part of what we want to do with this data. That's why we're doing this. So some of the lessons we learned, a lot of it, we noticed that as we're leaving, so we were there from 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 p.m. There was a significant chunk of people coming in the summer as we were leaving, which we sort of knew, but we didn't realize just how big a change that could be. So after work, there's a huge shift in population. And so we need to go back and collect data after our normal working hours. It was tough to do with our setup. We did find some bias in the way we're doing the surveys because there was a lot of language barriers, which we knew there might be, but we didn't realize it would be quite as diverse and large as it was. So there's and each lake was different. So in some lakes, it was a big Russian population that actually came in as a group. And there was also some cultural norms that came about as as an older male wearing a mask. I did have a safety vest on and it said UW, but it still was not appropriate for me to approach younger women. As an example, Russian women were protected by an older woman in the same, so if I got anywhere near them, this woman would come in between me and the other person and not allow me to approach. So it was a really interesting dynamic there. People were actively engaged with others or exercising that sort of precluded us from going up and interrupting what was going on. And we also wanted to reach people who aren't currently using lakes, but that was proved to be more difficult than we thought. And so we have to try some different approaches there. And we're going to use this data basically to figure out how do you decrease some of these barriers? How do you actually deal with park amenities to try to increase the needs or serving the needs of people that we've seen from what they've put on their surveys? And then we've already started working on the future of this collaboration and trying to go after external funding, which unfortunately was just turned down on Friday. But we're still working on trying to collect more information and then figure out how do we build community organization around these lake spaces because there is none right now. And I want to thank our team that put in all this time out there, some partial funding from NIEHS for my other research, and to some volunteers that helped us out with this project. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you, Jim. That was great. It's nice to see pictures of blue sky too. Okay, and our next presentation will be given by Chris Beasley. with the School of Social Work and, School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. Chris, over to you.
Thank you. And I also want to sort of acknowledge that Omari will be, as an alum, who will be joining us, as well as Tiara Dearbone, and this project was in partnership with the Pierce County Juvenile Court. First, I want to acknowledge formerly incarcerated community. I think much of the time when we do this work, we do so in community. Those who have built the community before us, and those who we share community and share ideas with. This work is a result not just of the individuals that planned it, but in that collective knowledge that we're all embedded in, including possible scholars. I connect this work to my scholarship and doing action that comes from my scholarship, and the action also informing my scholarship. Acknowledge the Pierce County Juvenile Court System for their partnership, Carly for her steadfast support, and the Office of Community Partnerships, both for the funding and understanding of community-based work and some of the challenges that go along with that, including sort of how things get funded in the university system. Just as a brief summary, the purpose of the project was to increase UWT's engagement with and support for overlooked BIPOC communities, communities that we're often not engaging in when we do DEI work, particularly for this project, those that have been oppressed by the criminalization system have been sort of interacted with it in a way that resulted in their punishment. The goals of the project were to enhance engagement with criminalized BIPOC youth. By criminalized, to be those who have been criminalized by the system, have criminal records due to it, and experience both the direct and collateral consequences of that. So engage with criminalized BIPOC alumni, youth, community members, and in organizations. And to facilitate promote youth possibilities, to help expand the possibilities that they imagine for themselves, and sort of set them down the path of perhaps some of those possibilities. We had various different activities to accomplish this. First of which was co-creating the project with alumni, with youth, community members, and organizations, as well as bringing in faculty members in that process. That resulted in a 3-day program of icebreakers, speakers, discussions, and reflections on possibilities. Sort of all these were centered on expanding those possibilities and helping you think through the challenges and how to navigate those pathways. And then having community organizations with tables there to support the youth, and having shared lunches with the community organizations as well as some of the other community members. Some of the outcomes we saw with the youth, it was primarily around, outside of the youth, it was development of new relationships with alumni, with community members, with organizations, deepening those relationships, seeing the continued engagement with alumni and community members and organizations, and thinking about how we can continue this work going forward. Also bringing faculty into the conversation was an important, bringing other faculty into the conversation was an important outcome. Around youth possibilities, what main thing that we saw was the expansion, the broadening of different possibilities. Early on, it was mostly around having money, having a job, sort of non-specific, and maybe like some construction thrown in there. But it is very much blue-collar work, nothing wrong with that, but narrow possibilities about what could be in their future. Also possibilities centered on money. Afterward, we saw things like education in there with graduation, people having jobs they've always wanted, being a good person, having a good life, making mom proud, and having a house. We saw not just careers, but also sort of how people live their life. With specific careers, we saw rappers, plumbers, custom car and semi fabricators, trucking companies, mechanics, real estate agents. Many of these were included in the program through people's stories, and so we saw those start to emerge in youth. And one particular outcome was about a week, and this is anecdotal, but about a week after the program, there was one of the youth was in a car with his friends who were getting ready to do something illegal. He decided to exit the car, and his friends all ended up getting caught for something that as an adult would be charged as a felony, but because he exited the car, he was okay. So just as an anecdote, about a week after this. What the youth saw as most helpful in this project was meeting people like them who've made it, learning about different possibilities, pushing them to do what is needed to both to start and stop things, and hope for accomplishing things, or what they saw as most important in this project. With that, I'll hand off to Omari, who will talk about ways that the funding supported the project.
For sure. So, obviously this took a lot of time and effort to put together. So the funding really made it possible. A lot of individuals who, have jobs that they have to take time off of and things like that, allowed them to be compensated. So we were able to pay every speaker who participated in this event. And also me and Tierra were able to get paid for our time as coordinators. There were a lot of meetings, a lot of time and effort that was put into building this thing. We were able to use the funding to kind of boost the confidence of youth. When you come from these marginalized populations, it can be hard to get in front of a group of people and be speaking and things like that. So we were able to provide supplies, get them all clothing, make sure they had opportunities to have their hair cut, where they actually felt good about being in the room, being present, and able to share their experiences with all eyes on them at certain times, right? And also each youth was able to receive a stipend for their participation upon completion of all the requirements. Also, we had people who were connected to the university, people who were alumni. We had several students who were alumni came through University of Washington, Tacoma, and it feels good as alumni to be able to come back and actually be compensated for things. We're often asked to come speak, and we're often asked to labor, right, on college campuses, whether it's University of Washington, Tacoma, or elsewhere, but it's rare that that is actually there. So it felt good to be able to offer that to everyone we wanted to be involved.
Thank you, Mark. Tara will talk about some of our proudest accomplishments.
Yeah, so I think we were really pleased with having built Youth Possibilities. We did a pre-survey and a post-survey when before the event with the youth and afterwards. And we recognized in the post-program survey, from the survey and from conversations with the youth near the end, about possibilities that they saw for themselves as opportunities. And a lot of it was related to some of the folks, formerly incarcerated folks, who had sought higher education or other sort of fields, work fields that did not require higher education. And youth were expressing being able to picture themselves having these same or similar accomplishments, and seeing themselves in places and possibilities for themselves that they hadn't recognized before or knew existed. It was a really great opportunity to strengthen community relationships. There are formerly incarcerated folks who have graduated from the University of Washington, including Omari and myself. And it was an incredible experience to have formerly incarcerated alumni visit, speak to the youth, and talk about how higher education impacted our lives, and to demonstrate to them that we are here, we exist, we had similar experiences, and you can too. And we also had visitors who were formerly incarcerated community members who are connected to other fields of work or have pursued other paths that created possibilities for youth. I think they were really excited to have the different sort of paths, folks who not necessarily accomplished higher education or not necessarily attended the University of Washington, but are doing well in life and feel really good about the things that they've accomplished and are part of this community, grew up or live in the community where the youth live. There were also a lot of folks who are willing to share their contact information, willing to allow youth to reach out to them afterwards, really creating relationships within the community. And we also had community organizations, either nonprofits or education resources, there to talk to youth about some of the possibilities, how to connect and how to seek information about opportunities for employment or education that they're seeking. And then having the juvenile court relationship was pretty important. I think it's also important for those who work within the criminal legal system to engage with the community and demonstrate that this is a partnership and that criminalization is not the answer to creating possibilities and youth sort of changed behavior for the future and to prevent recidivism. So I think it was really cool to demonstrate that the juvenile court was willing to engage with community to do something like this. And then of course, building capacity for future work. It was quite a process. It took a heck of a lot of work, but I think it was really important because we were able to build a foundation to continue this work. We have all the materials already laid out, a lot of the community partnerships to be able to do this again in the future and to make it less laborious. And we look forward to that and growing it. And we have a lot of new relationships because of the work that we did, which, as we know, connecting with the community grows really exponentially. So, the folks who visited would be more than happy to return and bring others or connect others. So, yeah, I think that feel free to add if you wanted to, Chris or Omari, but I am really proud of a lot of these accomplishments and look forward to growing it in the future.
I do want to add one thing. Like, for me, my hope is that this can become something that was not just a one-time thing, but an annual thing. And I have a contract with Pierce County Juvenile Court where I mentor youth. That's how we identified the youth who would be participating. And I did want to add that, in negotiating my contract for this year, there was a certain amount of money offered. I'm like, maybe we could put some of this money towards, doing this thing again, in 2022. So there's a strong possibility for partnership between Pierce County Juvenile Court and the University of Washington, Tacoma that just would have never existed without this process.
Thanks, Omari. Yeah. Just to wrap up briefly, sorry to cut you off there. Sorry, did you have one last thing you wanted to add?
I just wanted to add that, I think, obviously we can report on and we can do a pre and post survey, but I think one of the most incredible accomplishments to me was just seeing the ways that the young people engaged towards the end versus the way that they engaged towards the beginning. So in the beginning, understandably, they were sort of apprehensive, withdrawn, not really engaged, but at the end, they were, a lot of them were really excited to be talking about possibilities, really excited to be making friendships within the community, willing to talk to the folks who were there from colleges, willing to talk to the folks who were speakers, formerly incarcerated speakers. They were engaging more with each other, and they produced a written document about the possibilities that they see for themselves, and some of those were in great detail. And so I was really pleased with the way that relationship and the way that they engaged developed over the 3 days. And it was only 3 days, so it was pretty remarkable.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, there's just two things I'd like to highlight from this slide here around the challenges and advice. One of those challenges was around background checks that Omari, Tiara, and I sort of encountered when working with youth programs. We actually decided not to be the supervisory people with the youth because of the background check process, regardless of whether we would have cleared those background checks or not. We didn't want to subject ourselves to that, even though the state law doesn't really require you to do that. So we just wanted to acknowledge that those background checks is a major constraint and encourage UW to re-examine some of those background checks, particularly when dealing with youth over 16, which aren't mandated by the state in that case. Also, sort of the challenges around sort of labor and thinking through sort of building collective communities that you have many people to sort of approach this. And I'll just kind of close with those two challenges and advice.
Thank you, Chris, Tira, and Omari. That was wonderful. Carly, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Julie and I work with all of these folks throughout the year, but it's so nice to get to kind of sit back and listen to everything. Yeah, it's a great experience. So thank you all for being here today and for sharing all the amazing and really hard work, really challenging work you did navigating everything this year with all those, with your different projects. We are going to open it up to the audience for question and answer. This is going to be pretty informal. If you have a question, please just speak up and address which speaker you're going to ask the question to. And you can also put questions in the chat if you feel more comfortable with that. I'll open it up.
Have a lot of shyness, I see.
Also, if any of the...
Dr. Chen.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Dr. Chen.
Hi, this question's, or actually it's more of a comment. It's for, is it Dr. Gao who presented about the blue spaces and the lakes? The work that he's doing is great, but it reminds me, I think there was a lot of work done around fishing, right? That I used to live in West Seattle, and I remember if you go to the upper pier, all the guys are up there trying to catch salmon. But if you go to the lower pier, all the Southeast Asian refugees are fishing for piling perch for subsistence reasons, right? So I'm pretty sure Department of Health has done a lot of work around the fishing because, many of those areas were contaminated, like in Tacoma, the Theo Foss is contaminated, right? West Seattle and Duwamish is contaminated. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at that previous work or if there's still any existing networks with that could inform the work that you're doing in the lakes.
Great comment, thank you. We actually did work with Washington Department of Health on the risk assessment that we did in these lakes, and then with the counties on some of the other work. But so I'll have to go back and look at the work that you're referring to, but part of the issue is that we're working in freshwaters, and for some reason around here, salmon and saltwater is king. And so data on what happens in freshwater, unfortunately, doesn't have a whole lot. So we work both with Fish and Wildlife and with Department of Health, and nobody really had any good studies, unfortunately, that looked at who was doing that or who was fishing there. And I believe you're very correct. It's interesting. There's a lot of data on who catches trout because it's all a stocked operation. So you stock trout in the lake and you have to have a fishing license and you go catch these trout, but those trout are only in the lake for a week or two before they're caught. So they don't have any sort of buildup of contaminants in that span of time. But then there's a different population that comes in and fishes the rest of the summer. And that's the group that's pulling in these fish species that are, people consider lower, lower quality. They're freshwater fish that I grew up eating, but it turns out around here that's a different population that actually fishes for those and takes them home. And that's where we seem to have a data gap.
Anne, do you want to ask a question?
I do. Thank you, Carly. Hi, I'm Ann Toffin. I'm from the School of Urban Studies, and I want to agree with Carly saying that it was really an honor to hear about this work. And I know that the labor and the care that goes into the community engaged work that you're doing is really significant. So thank you for sharing it. It's really inspiring. And I had a similar response to Jim's from Earth Lab recently, so it's particularly nice to have such a hopeful and great overview. My question is for Dr. Minthorn about the work that you're doing with the heart work and the doctoral program in the Ed.D. And I was thinking of a Muckleshoot student that I had probably 10 years ago who was interested in doing planning and land use professional work and ended up going to get a certificate at Eastern Washington University in their urban and regional planning department. And I wondered if there's any movement to expand or develop more of a professionally oriented program. Like I think about the work that Michelle has done with Tom Kuntz on commons-based research. And as Dr. Chen was just bringing up fishing, there's so many land use and policy issues locally that are so important for sustainability that I think tribes have better knowledge, frankly, and deeper and different understandings than some of our existing institutions. And I'm just curious if there's been any conversation about more of a professional degree or, to complement the doctoral education that you're providing.
Can you clarify what you mean by professional degree?
Well, so when you think about, I'm a policy scholar and planning scholar. And so like the 2-year program that we have in community planning, we know that many of our students, after they've gotten their undergraduate degree, are either already working full-time or will move into nonprofit or government roles, as opposed to, I think of a doctoral degree as being more traditionally academic. Maybe the Ed.D. is not as kind of moving into academia and people are teaching. But when I think professional degree, I think like an MPH, an MPA.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so now I understand your meaning. So we are not a traditional PhD program where we understand we have full-time working adults who are part of our on-campus EDD and our Muckleshoot EDD program. And so we do have those that are working with tribal, they are working in their tribal governance office, they're working in their tribal colleges, they're working in school systems, they're working in various places. So I think the benefit of our EDD program is very broad. So we actually have 3 areas, which is adult education, community leadership, and higher education administration. So there's, community leadership, which adult education falls under, higher education, and then P12. So we have like for program and superintendent. So it's very broad, but I think has really helped with this Muckleshoot cohort because we have a high interest from tribal communities. And we've been actually just started recruiting this last January. So if your person that you're referencing to is interested or maybe interested in participating, it's a 3-year program. Awesome. But even over the last 2 months, we've talked to 20 people that are interested in the Muckleshoot cohort. So I'm really excited about that. And so there's definitely a need and interest from tribal indigenous communities, not only in Washington state, but also Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Nevada, Utah. So there's lots of places I think that there's a need for it. So just, you're welcome to reference them to me and I'm happy to talk with them, or Ashley Walker as well.
Thank you. I know that what you're doing is, there's a huge need for it, and I hope it didn't sound. I think I misspoke when I was trying to distinguish between the educational needs versus planning and land use and environmental policy practitioners. So I apologize if that didn't come across, because I'm sure that you have far more applicants than you can host in any given year. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for clarifying.
Do we have any other questions, or if any of the faculty fellows want to ask the other faculty fellows?
I have a question.
Okay.
All right, that's for anybody who wants to answer it, or all of you. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. I'm curious, as you began to do your work, you already had established a series of community partners you wanted to work with. Did any of you encounter a situation in which you expanded the community partnership while you were doing the project? In other words, others who joined or you recruited into this work, anything that you would want to share along that line? Any of you want to start? I'm not going to call on any one person.
I think for us, I think we came in with a certain idea about, I think primarily centered on like faculty and bringing together faculty, but also like some community, like Pierce County as a community organization. I think as we got into like collaborative planning and doing like a stakeholder analysis and deciding like who all to bring to the table, and I think that expanded like considerably about like who do we want to be working in partnership on this. I think including like sort of thinking about the youth as partners, and different like organizations, nonprofits, other community members. I think that was a big change for us as we went through this.
Thank you, Chris.
I think I think that is a question that we are very seriously considering as we look at sharing our findings and planning next steps. For instance, I know there is a very, very big network of South Asian agencies across the country that work on issues of domestic violence. So getting connected to that group, there's also a huge network of survivors, getting connected to that community as well. Yeah.
I think our difficulty was that there's a lack of kind of organizing around the scale that we were looking at. And usually what happens around these lakes is you have a lake association, which is made up primarily of house owners that have places on the lake. So it's not the population that we're interested in or looking at. We can get a hold of them. It seems that there's actually a lack of communication across the users of these spaces and no sort of umbrella organization that allows them to get involved. And that's part of our kind of one of the take-home messages we got out of this, and one of the things we proposed for the Earth Lab grant was to come up with some way to help organize the interest around these lakes, because currently right now doesn't seem to be a way for them, or isn't an existing way for that, with the exception of the giant lakes. So for Lake Washington, there's a group that's actually doing some work in different parts of that, but not in these smaller urban lakes that serve more of the dispersed population.
Thank you.
I would say we've deepened our relationship, I think, as a result of this. So I can just share an example with our Muckleshoot Partnership Education Committee. We meet, and last year there was a suggestion brought up from one of the tribal council about having an effective teaching institute, or like but just from those conversations within that meeting, then the Muckleshoot Adult and Higher Education, they hosted a Muckleshoot Effective Teaching Institute in June. And so all of our EDD students were able to be paid for to participate in that, including our non-Indigenous students. And so I think that was an opportunity for us to broaden our reach, to not only make it focused on Indigenous students or those that work with tribal communities, but also all of our doctoral students who are working across the state of Washington and other places. So I think it's also bridging those connections as well. And I think that was really helpful in seeing that, but also we were then able to participate and have some of our doctoral students participate and present as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So I have one more. If nobody else is going to ask questions. I saw the list of challenges and opportunities in all the slides from all the presenters. Next steps. I assume you have next steps in mind, because this is not the last thing that you're doing. You're expanding and building. Maybe if each of you could just for a few minutes say what is next for you. Chris, we'll start with you. How is that?
Thanks. I don't know if I see Omari still on here. We still have to discuss part of this. We've definitely talked about like continuing the, having regular work around like youth possibilities, but I'm talking with like some of our STEM programs, et cetera, about like maybe doing some more structured program development. We sort of have like a basic foundation. Maybe doing some research on that as a way to get some extra support for building youth possibilities and looking at the different effects of youth possibilities. And we definitely saw some powerful things in just like an entry and an exit survey. So I think that could be important in sort of not only understanding how to move criminalized youth, BIPOC youth's possibilities, but also sort of developing, getting some resources to support that work as well.
Thanks, Chris. Anandita or anyone else? Yeah.
So I have, thanks for that question, Ali. I have two concrete next steps. My one is that I want to work with those who took part in the Faculty Fellows project and present my initial insights on the data and receive their feedback, which is called member checking. However, I don't want to do that without compensating for their time and expertise. So I just wrote a small grant and I'm hoping to get some funding from my school so that I can plan that collaborative data analysis plan over the next few months. And then one of the things I was not able to do in this one-year project was establish more long-term relationships with survivors. I was able to interview them just at one point in time. So I have proposed a more longitudinal study where I get to work with them for a year, perhaps. And I did submit to the Royalty Research Fund, did not get it, but I did get excellent comments from the reviewers. So I'm hoping to do a resubmission in March.
Robin or Jim?
Yeah, so what we thought about expanding is one is to continue to engage with Dr. Michelle Jacobs and potentially host more writing retreats, like at certain steps in this next year when the students are finishing their dissertation. And so like as they're completing their proposal, hosting something, as they're starting to write up their analysis or findings from whether it's their applied project or their research, to be able to do so, and again, to develop their Indigenous writing voice and just to help them think through it in a way that's very intentional, Indigenous grounded. But the other thing and how we're deepening our relationship with Muckleshoot is we're also currently looking at developing a master's way of connecting to the Muckleshoot tribe. So we may be expanding that partnership, depending on how everything unfolds with them. And so we are also having that as a discussion. And to me, that really does say something, because I think one of the things I really want us to acknowledge is that we have not been great at the UW Tacoma and building partnerships with tribes in the area. And so to be able to have a partnership with a tribe like this and have a memorandum of agreement, this is the first time to my knowledge we have had one at UW Tacoma. And so it's really important, like if they trust us for the EDD and they're trusting us with another level of education, that does say something good for our institution. And we just need to continue to do a good job in cultivating good relationships. And I think that's really important in how we continue to move forward. And so the other thing that we are also working with advancement is starting to do individual stories on the Muckleshoot doctoral students to be able to highlight their journeys and like where they're coming from, because all of them are special and are leaders in their own various ways. And so just wanting to make sure we're honoring their own individual stories too, because they are part of the collective. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to most in the near future is actually for us to meet in person for the first time, because we have not met in person because of the pandemic. They've been 2 years meeting virtually. And so this summer we're planning to meet in person for the first time. And that'll be the first time that we meet on tribal lands as well. And so I'm really excited about that because we want to make it a celebration and really try to honor that moment. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to as well.
Thanks, Robin.
I mentioned already, so we're trying to go after with the partners some additional work that tries to build on the potential risk assessment side of things, and working more in depth on surveying people on how they, more specifically on how they access the lake itself, or fish, and how much of that they do, and so on. So that's part of what we're trying to move forward with, is some stuff on that end of things. We're also interested in trying to develop a framework for people that are interested in using lakes and lakeside parks to form an some sort of organization that gives them a voice in what goes on at the parks, and to give their feedback more as a group. So that's another part of what we're trying to move forward with at this time. So, but we trying to figure out how to get that put together and funded and so on. And then we still have data analysis going on because of the amount of stuff that we collected, and we're mentoring a graduate student as part of her PhD on that work. So I'm not going to take over the data analysis. It's for her to do as part of her PhD. So
great. Any other questions before I go through my conclusion? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for these fantastic presentations. I am delighted to hear the work you've done, the plan that you have. And as you know, community engagement never ends. It's an ongoing process for people who do this work, and many of us, many faculty, staff, and students are involved in this work. We are on a campus with a very specific mission of engagement, and I'm glad to see the kind of work that is getting done. Our office is here to help. But more than anything else, I need to do a couple of thanks first. Thank you for your fantastic presentations. Thanks to community partners who have worked hard in terms of building relationships and committing themselves to the work that we do. And we work this together as a co-production that we are involved with. Dr. Toffen, Robin, Jim, Chris, all the folks who have spoken. If you look, there is variation themes that says co-production, or says co-development or co-production of knowledge. So in some ways, the work that we do is important. So thank you for all you do. Thanks to the community partners, thanks to students, alumni who are with us. It looks like we have a community internally built also that expands outward. So that's great. And the work that's done is amazing. I'm looking forward to the next phase for everyone. Please do remember that the Office of Community Partnership here is to support the work that you do, your work, staff, and students. We are hoping to expand the services that we have, but for what we do, I hope that we have been able to provide you with the support that you need. I want to thank Julia and Carly. Without them, this office wouldn't exist. So I tend to show up and wear my suit and give a talk, but it is really their hard work. And so I want to appreciate them. Also, Ainsley, thank you for joining us. Ainsley is new to our Office of Community Partnership. Welcome. And so is Alan. So thank you so much all for spending time with us. Thank you for your all great work. And I look forward to interacting with you in person. You're almost there. So hang in there. Hopefully a new variant will not catch up with us. So take care. Have a wonderful day. And we'll see you around.